The moment I walked into the office that morning, I knew something was off. The air was tense, and the usual hum of chatter felt more like whispered gossip. People were staring, but no one would meet my eyes. Something was about to go down. I could feel it in my bones, and then the email hit my inbox. Meeting with the CEO. Effective immediately. I exhaled slowly. I'd worked at this company for years, never seeking the spotlight, just getting the job done. And yet, I had a bad feeling. The CEO, Richard Langston, was known for his ruthlessness. The kind of guy who thought power made him untouchable, that respect was something you could demand rather than earn. If he had decided I was in his way, there was nothing I could do. Still, I wasn't going to cower. I grabbed my coffee, straightened my tie, and walked to his office like I owned the place. Inside, Richard sat behind his massive glass desk, staring at his phone like I was wasting his time before I even said a word. His office screamed wealth. Marble floors, city skyline view, overpriced modern art. It was a shrine to his ego that I shut the door behind me. You wanted to see me? Richard didn't bother looking up right away. When he did, he smirked. Yeah, Tom, take a seat. I didn't. He leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers behind his head. You've been with this company a long time. Your work is solid. No complaints. I raised an eyebrow. But he grinned, like he was enjoying himself. But you don't belong here anymore. A strange silence filled the room that I blinked. Excuse me? Richard waved his hand, like brushing away an irrelevant question. Look, you're good at what you do, but that's not enough. This company is about making waves, about standing out. And you? You blend into the background. You don't demand attention. You don't command the room. And frankly, that's a liability. I clench my jaw. So, I'm being fired because I don't what? Showboat enough? Stroke your ego at board meetings. Richard chuckled. No, you're being fired because I need leaders who exude dominance, who make people stop and listen. You're not that guy, Tom. He said it like it was a fact, like I was just supposed to nod and walk away, that I took a breath, keeping my voice even. You think leadership is about being the loudest voice in the room? Richard's smirk didn't falter. I think leadership is about taking what you want. And you? You're just too humble. It took everything in me not to laugh. This man had no idea what real leadership looked like. He thought power was about control, about intimidation. But I knew better. Still, I wasn't going to beg. I squared my shoulders. If I don't belong here, then I won't stay. Richard clapped his hands together. Good. Glad you see it my way. He gestured toward the door. Now, get out of my office. I didn't move. Instead, I took a step forward, locking eyes with him. You know, Richard, you just made the biggest mistake of your career. His smirk wavered just a little. Oh, and why's that? I leaned in. Because leadership isn't about demanding attention. It's about earning respect. And one day, you're going to realize the difference. For the first time, he hesitated. It was brief, just a flicker of doubt in his eyes. But I saw it. And then, without another word, I turned and walked out of his office. As I made my way through the building for the last time, I felt relief. Like a weight had been lifted. I wasn't afraid of what came next. I knew my worth. But Richard, he had no idea what he'd just set in motion. Because this was just the beginning. Walking out of that office should have felt like a defeat. But it didn't. I could still hear Richard's smug voice in my head, dismissing me like I was nothing. Like years of loyalty, hard work, and results meant less than his twisted idea of dominance. I wasn't angry. Not really. That I was disappointed. Not in myself. In him. Richard Langston was supposed to be a leader. A visionary. But all he really was a coward in an expensive suit. As I made my way through the open office floor, I could feel the weight of 100 eyes on me. Everyone had heard the rumors by now. Whispers spread fast in a corporate environment like this. People I'd worked with for years, some who respected me, some who barely noticed me, were all watching. Some looked guilty, some shocked, others just afraid. They all knew how Richard operated. They knew anyone could be next. That I didn't say a word. Didn't stop to make a scene. Just walked straight to my office, grabbed the framed picture of my family off my desk, and took one last look at the space I'd spent years building my career in. Then I left. But before I even reached the parking lot, something unexpected happened. Tom! I turned to see one of my closest colleagues, Michael Hayes, jogging toward me. He was one of the few people at this company I actually trusted. "Hey," I said, watching him catch his breath. "What's up?" Michael hesitated. He looked around, making sure no one else was listening. "Is it true? Did he really fire you?" I sighed, nodding. "Yeah." Michael clenched his jaw. "That bastard. After everything you've done for this place?" I shrugged. "Doesn't matter now." But Michael shook his head. "No, it does. Because you weren't just some employee, Tom. You were the only one in this company who actually gave a damn about people." That caught me off guard. Michael continued, lowering his voice. "You know, half the people here are miserable, right? They stay because they need the paycheck, but the second they get a better offer, they're gone. Richard doesn't build loyalty, he builds fear. But you made people believe that integrity still mattered." I wasn't sure what to say to that. Michael glanced around again, then leaned in. "Listen, I can't stay long, but if you ever decide to do something, if you ever need people, you call me. Because I sure as hell don't want to be working for that guy 5 years from now." I studied him for a moment. There was something in his eyes, something I hadn't noticed before. Hope. And that's when it hit me. Richard thought firing me was the end of the story, and he had no idea it was just the beginning. The plan takes shape. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I found a quiet coffee shop, grabbed a table in the back, and pulled out my laptop that if I was going to do this, if I was going to turn this situation into an opportunity, I needed a plan. That I started listing out every skill, every connection, every idea I had, that I wasn't going to just find another job, that I was going to build something better, something that proved you didn't need arrogance to be a leader. That success wasn't about stepping on people to climb higher. That real leadership wasn't about power. It was about purpose. And the best part, I wasn't going to do it alone. The next few days were a blur of calls, meetings, and strategy sessions. I reached out to old colleagues, former clients, even competitors I respected. And the more people I talked to, the clearer it became. People were tired of the Richard Langstons of the world. They were ready for something new. Meanwhile, back at Langston Enterprises, while I was busy laying the groundwork for my future, Richard was dealing with an entirely different problem. That at first, he probably thought firing me was just another Tuesday. Another disposable employee, another power move to remind everyone who was in charge. But then, the cracks started to show. That IT started small. A few key clients, ones I had worked with personally for years, suddenly started asking questions. "Where's Tom? Why wasn't he on our last call? We want to continue working with him. Where did he go?" Richard, of course, tried to brush it off. He probably fed them some nonsense about restructuring or company direction. But clients aren't stupid. And then the real problems began. Employees started quitting. First, it was the ones no one noticed, the quiet, steady workers who kept the machine running. The ones Richard never bothered to learn the names of. Then, it was managers. People who had been there for years started handing in their resignations, and the pattern was impossible to ignore. They weren't just leaving for better opportunities. They were leaving because of him. The breaking point one evening, about a month after I was fired, I got a text from Michael. "Turn on the news. Now." I grabbed the remote, flipped to the business channel, and there was the breaking news. Langston Enterprises facing major crisis as key employees walk out. Richard Langston was standing at a press conference, looking furious. Reporters were throwing questions at him like grenades. "Mr. Langston, can you comment on the recent departures from your company? Sources say over a dozen top executives have resigned in the past few weeks. What's going on? Is it true that multiple clients have pulled their contracts?" Richard's face was red with barely contained rage. He muttered something about restructuring and loyalty tests, but no one was buying it. That I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed, watching the downfall begin. IT wasn't just about me anymore. This was bigger than one person. This was justice. And the best part, I wasn't even finished yet. Richard Langston was drowning. That I could see it in the way he clenched his jaw during that press conference. His hands gripping the podium like he wanted to snap it in half. He was a man used to control, used to bending people to his will with money, power, and intimidation. But now he was scrambling. That I turned up the volume as the reporters continued firing questions at him. "Mr. Langston, reports indicate that over 20 employees, including senior executives, have left Langston Enterprises in just the past month. What's your response to allegations that this is due to poor leadership? Multiple sources claim that long-term clients are pulling out because they preferred to work with former employees who are no longer with the company. How do you plan to address these losses? Richard's face twitched. He took a deep breath, then forced a tight-lipped smile. There is no crisis, he said, his voice dripping with false confidence. Langston Enterprises is undergoing a transformation. Those who left did so because they couldn't keep up with our ambitious vision. And as for our clients, we're already in discussions to bring in bigger, better partners. I almost laughed. Richard was arrogant, sure. But even he knew that was a lie. He could spin it however he wanted. But the truth was simple. People weren't buying into his bullshit anymore, and he had no one to blame but himself. The fallout begins over the next few weeks. Langston Enterprises kept bleeding. More resignations. More clients backing out. More cracks forming in the once untouchable empire Richard had built. And the best part? I hadn't even made my move yet that I'd spent the past month quietly building. While Richard was too busy putting out fires, I was gathering the people who actually made his company successful. The ones he dismissed, ignored, or outright mistreated. Michael was the first to join me. Then Samantha Carter, a brilliant strategist who had been Richard's right-hand woman before she finally had enough of his ego. After that, it was like a domino effect. Developers, designers, project managers, even clients. People weren't just leaving Langston Enterprises. They were coming to me that I wasn't running a company. Not yet. But I had a team, a damn good team, and together, we were about to shake things up. Richard tries to retaliate. It didn't take long before Richard caught on point one morning. My phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in a long time. Richard Langston, did I let it ring? Then he tried again. And again, to be why the fourth call, I sighed and answered. Richard, I said, leaning back in my chair. What a surprise. There was a long silence. Then, you're behind this, he said, his voice low and venomous. Aren't you? I smirked. Behind what, exactly? Don't play dumb, Tom. His voice sharpened. You're poaching my people. Stealing my clients. Stealing. I let out a small laugh. Richard, I'm not forcing anyone to do anything. People are choosing to leave. Ever ask yourself why? He exhaled sharply. You think you're so clever, don't you? You think you can take me down? I don't have to take you down, I said. You're doing a fine job of that yourself. Another silence. Then, you're making a mistake, Richard hissed. You think you can beat me? I have power, I have money, I have nothing. I cut in. Not anymore. And deep down, I think you know that. For the first time, he didn't have a response that I hung up. The final blow, I knew Richard wouldn't go down quietly. He was the kind of man who would rather burn everything to the ground than admit he was losing. And sure enough, within a week, rumors started spreading. Richard was trying to blacklist me. He called up companies, competitors, investors, anyone he could think of, to warn them about me. Tom Cruise is unstable. He's trying to sabotage businesses. If you work with him, you'll regret it. It was desperate, pathetic, even, and it completely backfired. See, the thing about power? It only works if people respect you. Richard had burned so many bridges over the years that most people weren't listening to him anymore. If anything, his attacks on me made people more curious. Who was this Tom Cruise that Richard Langston was so afraid of? And that curiosity, it brought me exactly what I needed: investors, backers, partners. People started reaching out. Not because I asked them to, but because they believed in what I was building. The moment everything changed, and then, one day, I got a call from someone I never expected, a billionaire investor. Someone with real influence. Someone who had seen everything unfold and was very interested in what I was doing. That we met at a private club, the kind of place where deals are made over expensive whiskey and quiet conversations. That he leaned forward, studying me carefully. Tell me, Tom, if I were to fund you, what exactly would you build? I took a breath, and then I told him about a company where employees weren't just disposable assets, where leadership meant lifting people up, not tearing them down, a place where integrity wasn't a weakness, but a superpower. When I finished, he sat back, nodding slowly. I like it, he said. I'll back you. Just like that, a multi-million-dollar investment, enough to not just compete with Langston Enterprises, but to bury it. The beginning of the end. By the time Richard realized what was happening, It was too late that I wasn't just some ex-employee with a grudge, that I was his worst nightmare, that I had his best people, his most loyal clients. And now, I had the funding to take him on directly, and Richard knew it, for the first time in his life. He wasn't the one in control anymore. Richard Langston was unraveling, and everyone could see it. The once untouchable CEO, the man who thought himself invincible, was now scrambling to keep his empire from collapsing. His company was in free fall. Clients were leaving in droves. The best employees were gone. And now, I had the backing to launch something that would finish the job. The business world was watching. And Richard, he was finally afraid. The war begins the moment my new company, Cruise Dynamics, was officially announced. The gloves came off that I didn't just compete with Langston Enterprises. I attacked, that we went after their biggest clients, offering better deals, better service, and most importantly, a better work environment. People wanted out of Langston Enterprises so badly that they were practically begging to join us. And Richard, he lost his damn mind. He went full scorched earth. First, he filed lawsuits. He tried to claim I had stolen trade secrets, which was laughable, considering all I had taken with me was my dignity. Then, he launched a smear campaign. Articles popped up trying to paint me as some kind of backstabber, a traitor to the company that made me. It was desperate, and nobody bought it, because the truth was simple. People knew who I was, and more importantly, they knew who Richard was. The industry had seen how he operated. They had seen the way he burned people, how he treated employees like they were nothing. And now, that arrogance was finally catching up to him. The turning point: one day, Michael, now my right-hand man, stormed into my office, barely able to contain his grin. "You're going to want to see this," he said, tossing a tablet onto my desk. That I picked it up. That IT was an anonymous expose that a former Langston Enterprises employee had leaked internal emails, proving that Richard had been trying to sabotage me behind the scenes, that IT was bad, that he had bribed investors to pull out of deals with me, that he had tried to spread false rumors about Cruise Dynamics. He had even blackmailed people into staying at his company. And now, it was all public. The business world erupted. Overnight, Richard went from being a powerful CEO to corporate poison. His board, his own executives, started pulling away. Langston Enterprises stock plummeted. And then, the final blow came. The end of Richard Langston. A week later, I got a call. Michael picked up, listening for a few seconds before looking at me with wide eyes. "It's happening," he whispered. That I took the phone. That IT was one of my contacts from inside Langston Enterprises. "It's over," the voice said. "The board just forced him out." I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. Richard Langston, the man who thought he was untouchable, had just been removed from his own company. That I hung up and leaned back in my chair. Michael grinned. "So, that's it?" I shook my head. "No, not yet, because there was one last thing I had to do." The final meeting. A few days later, Richard called me. For the first time ever, he wasn't yelling, that he wasn't threatening, that he was quiet. "We need to talk," he said. That I agreed. That we met at a private lounge. Neutral ground. Richard looked wrecked. Gone was the arrogant smirk, the sharp, cocky suit. That he looked smaller, like a man who had finally realized the truth. That he sat across from me, silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. "You won," he muttered, shaking his head. "You actually won." I studied him. This was never about winning, Richard. It was about doing things the right way, something you never understood. He chuckled bitterly. "And look where that got me." I leaned forward. "No, look where you got you. This was never about me taking you down. This was about you finally facing the consequences of the way you treated people." He exhaled slowly. I thought power was everything. That if you could control people, you could control success." I nodded. "And now?" Richard was silent for a long time. Then, in a voice I never expected to hear from him, he said, "I was wrong." And just like that, the war was over. But there was still one last move to make. Richard Langston sat across from me, defeated. The man who once held absolute power now looked like a shell of himself. The sharp confidence was gone, replaced with something I never thought I'd see in his eyes: regret. And maybe even a little fear. That I let the silence stretch between us, watching him fidget with the drink in his hand. He wasn't used to feeling powerless. Finally, he sighed. "I lost everything." I didn't respond, because the truth was, he did this to himself. The final offer. Richard exhaled slowly and looked up at me. "You know, I always thought you were weak." I smirked. I know, but you're not, he admitted. You're the only person who ever stood up to me. And now, you're the one sitting where I used to be. He leaned back. So, what happens now? You've got your company. You've won. Are you here to rub it in? I shook my head. No, I studied him carefully. Richard, I said, you may not realize it yet, but this is the best thing that could have happened to you. He scoffed. Getting humiliated in front of the entire industry? Losing everything I built? Yeah, great. I leaned forward. You lost your company, Richard. But maybe, just maybe, you still have a chance to fix yourself. His face twitched. Fix myself? You thought power meant controlling people. But real leadership? It's about lifting people up. He was quiet for a long time. Then he did something I never expected. He laughed. Not in the arrogant, smug way he used to. This was different. Almost tired. You sound just like the kind of leader I should have been, he muttered. Too bad it took me losing everything to see it. He rubbed his hands together. So what now? Ich start over? Work my way up? No one's going to hire me after this. I stared at him. And then, against all logic, against everything he had done to me, I made him an offer that a second chance. Come work for me. I said. Richard blinked. You're joking. I shook my head. I'm serious. You lost everything because of your ego. But if you're willing to learn, if you're really ready to change, then maybe you deserve another shot. He looked at me like I had lost my mind. You'd actually trust me? No, I admitted. Not yet. He swallowed. Then why? I leaned back. Because I believe people can change. If they really want to. Richard stared at me, his jaw clenching and unclenching. Then, for the first time since I had known him, I saw something new in his expression. Humility that he exhaled. I don't deserve this. I nodded. Probably not. Another pause, then slowly he reached across the table and extended his hand. I won't waste this, he said that I shook it. You'd better not. The legacy we left behind over the next year. Cruise Dynamics became a powerhouse that we built a company where people wanted to work. Where leadership wasn't about dominance, but integrity. And Richard, he wasn't the same man anymore that at first people doubted him. They didn't trust him, and honestly, I didn't blame them. But to my surprise, he proved them wrong that he didn't go back to being a CEO. He didn't demand power. Instead, he listened that he learned, and slowly he started to earn back something he never had before. Respect. Final thoughts one night, long after the office had emptied, I found Richard sitting alone in the break room that I walked over. Long day. He chuckled. Just thinking. He looked up at me. You know, Tom, I don't think I ever really understood what power was. Until I lost it. I sat across from him. And what do you think now? Richard smiled, but it wasn't like before. This one was real. Power isn't about control, he said. It's about what you do for others. I nodded. Maybe he finally got it. Maybe, after everything, he was finally the man he was meant to be. And me, I didn't care about winning, because in the end, the real victory wasn't taking him down, that IT was building something better.